What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Bitcoin and Markets. Hope you're doing well out there. Today, I'm going to go over some charts on Bitcoin and macro. Then there was a really good episode of China Unscripted that dropped, and I'm just going to listen to some of those highlights and react to those. A tweet thread by Balding's World. Great follow on Twitter if you want to go over and follow Balding's World. We'll cover that tweet. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about Bitcoin and the credit debate that I've had started on the Telegram this morning. And we're going back and forth about Bitcoin and how credit will be in the Bitcoin standard. All right, let's jump right into it. So let's find the website first and foremost and go up to the homepage. This is bitcoinandmarkets.com. It's where I come out with all my content. I do two newsletters. One is free, one is to premium members. And I put all my podcast episodes out, all the show notes and links and all that stuff that I talk about. I put that out on here. So check out bitcoinandmarkets.com. Okay, let's jump over to the charts before we get into anything else. And here you're seeing the Bitcoin chart, 34,555 right now on Bitstamp. Really nothing too exciting today. We did have a slight sell-off. We peaked up here at 36,000, just shy of 36,000 on Bitstamp, and it came right back into the range it has been holding in the mid 34s for the last week. But this is a good sign because Bitcoin, needs to consolidate. If I bring up the RSI here, you can see the RSI got as high as 87, which is not the highest that Bitcoin's daily RSI has gotten, but it's very overextended at the top there back on the 25th of October. And I was calling for a consolidation, maybe a little downward price movement, but it actually is consolidated as it has gone higher. So that is a very good thing. You can see daily RSI is now down to 73. I saw it all the way down to 70, I believe, this morning at the bottom of this candle. So that's very good. If we zoom back out to January, the last time RSI was this high, the January spike got up to 89. So this time it only got up to 87, but you can see that is very comparable and very overextended here, overbought. But then it also consolidated for about a week and got as low on the RSI as 77, spiked and kept going higher another 10, 15%. So this is consolidating as it's going down. The RSI is going down, but price is going up. And that looks like what it's doing again here. So we should be still on track for any sort of big move up to the upside. Okay, let's take a look at some other macro stuff. You guys know that I follow the dollar. I've had calls on the dollar for years and years, calling for a stronger dollar when everybody back in COVID, when all this money printing was happening, that people were calling for a weaker dollar. And I was in Bitcoin. I think I was the lone voice in Bitcoin calling for a stronger dollar, and that's what we got. So I have been pretty accurate on my dollar calls. I have been calling for a more of a pullback consolidation in the dollar as well, because it got to certain retracement levels, certain horizontal resistance levels, and so it was time to cool off in the dollar, as well as rates, yields on the treasuries were, especially the 10-year, the longer term, that was putting pressure as well as a strong dollar, and oil was also going up. Remember that a few weeks ago. And I was talking at that time, probably maybe this time in October, I started using the term that we're going to reach a climax in markets, that we're right close to a climax in markets. Put out stuff on Bitcoin Magazine Pro, so you can check that out at bmpro.substack.com, talking all about a climax in markets on my professional newsletter. I was talking about that. And what do we see? We see the dollar rolling over here down to 105 now. Looks like it probably broke 105 today. Big down candle on the DXY. Let's roll into those yields that I was talking about, and I'll hide some of these things. This is a pretty big deal. Three big down days for yields. This is what we expect when the market actually decides, oh crap, the we are going into recession. We need a flight to safety. We're having some problems, and they turn from selling treasuries into sourcing treasuries. Selling treasuries to get to meet their dollar shortage. Well, now perhaps the most acute pressure, the worst banks and the worst big people in the entities in the financial system that were under stress, they have defaulted or been able to roll over finally. And now it changes from a dollar shortage mentality really quickly into a sourcing more treasuries, a flight to safety. All right. And that's what we're seeing here as well. Let's put this on a line and bring up the 2-year. And this is one thing I've been talking about. Before a recession, you always have the yields peak and then start coming down before the recession starts a year out or so. And so if the interest rates, if the 10-year was continuing to go higher, we could not definitively say, but we are very, very confident in saying that we are not entering recession. We are not in recession because yields are going higher. Yields always turn over and go down roughly a year before recession starts. So if you're predicting a recession coming in 2024, which I am, then we wanted to see this blow off top, a climax in yields right around this time and start heading down. And that's what we're seeing. So also this chart is showing that the 10-year caught up to the 2-year. There's still confusion over bear steepener or bull steepener. I've seen it different things in different places, and it doesn't make sense to call this a bear steepener, because if yields are going higher, that is not bearish. That means that money is flowing, that people are confident that they can afford higher yields. If people can't afford higher yields, then yields will fall. And so that's really a bull steepener. But anyway, then in a second phase of this turnover into pre-recession, I called it pre-recession on my most recent newsletter. The turnover into pre-recession is going to be dictated by the 2-year falling faster, the short-term rates falling faster than the long-term rates. You can go back in any recession in the last 40 years, it is the exact same. So what I did here was this horizontal line, and I shared this earlier with you guys on Telegram, so you guys don't have eyes right now, but you can go back and look at those charts that I posted a little bit earlier. You can see the 2-year broke this previous low from early October. So their structure, the 2-year, is in a little bit more precarious structure here than the 10-year. Right now it's testing the low from early October. So that tells me that the 2-year is most likely going to fall a little bit faster here than the 10-year and uninvert this curve. So I've been watching that very, very closely. All right, next one up is going to be oil. Oil is not looking good. Had a big down day today. When I looked at it earlier, it was at the bottom of this candle. This is technically not a bearish engulfing, but it was earlier today. This is not good. Bearish engulfing, way under the 50-day moving average. Let me bring up the moving averages. Way under the 50-day moving average. Demand is falling off a cliff. Going into recession, oil always falls in recession. There are some periods where sometimes where oil will spike right before recession, and that makes sense because oil will spike up. People won't be able to, it'll pinch people's wallets, and then recession starts. So that makes sense. But in a recession, oil prices always fall. So if we're going into recession in 2024, maybe not the first half of 2024, but the second half of 2024, demand is just going to continue to fall. So this is contrary to what the fear mongers out there in macro, the macro analysts, they're fear mongering about inflation and peak cheap oil and all this other stuff. That's not the case. Okay. The cheap oil is not gone. The US is producing right now at all-time highs, and it doesn't look like it's going away anytime soon. Doesn't look like demand's coming back anytime soon. So for the foreseeable future, I mean, you can never say exactly that, okay, there's going to be a 1 month period or a couple week period where oil prices spike and then they come back down. Okay. I'm not going to say it's going to be a straight line or anything, but oil prices should trend downward for the next couple years, maybe in the next 5 years. What else about this? Now, that is also with the caveat that if there is serious war in the Middle East, the markets still are not pricing in this Israeli conflict as serious geopolitically yet. But if it does expand to oil producing countries, then yeah, oil will probably spike, but it's not on necessarily a shortage or a peak cheap oil sort of thing. It's just based off of a supply shock at that point. People are worried about a supply shock, and there probably would be a supply shock if there's something going on in the Persian Gulf there. So anyway, that's it for that. Let's take a look at stocks. Just monster move here in the stock market. Gapping above the 200-day yesterday, gapping above the 50-day today. It is just looking extremely strong. Of course, there's some short squeezes going on. There's some liquidations, but a lot of these hedge funds they have a lot of cash on the sidelines. They're not in. I've seen multiple things over the last year saying that this period is very high in cash allocation for people. So if this continues, there is tons and tons of room for this to take off and continue going. And right now it looks extremely strong in the stock market. Okay. What else? We looked at Bitcoin. Okay, that's going to do it for that. Let's roll over to this video, and I'm going to share my screen with Telegram. How's it going, guys? I see you in here today. Share system audio. Now, this is David Stilwell. I believe he was in the State Department, an ambassador to China. So he has a real good experience, deep experience with the CCP, with their system, with the geopolitics of East Asia, and the geopolitics around China, as a whole. So he's a really good guy to listen to. And this was a episode just a few days ago from China Unscripted, 3 days ago. I picked out some highlights that I want to listen to. I might just let them play through, or I might interrupt. I don't know. My style is kind of free flow. So let's get going on this one. So the main topic here is China and Russia seem like they're allies right now, but they're not really allies. And in this episode, they get into lots of stuff, lots of flashpoints that could kick off, as well as that China is not as strong as people think. All right, so let's begin.
And then the most major issue here that we should talk about is Vladivostok. It doesn't take a whole lot of research to discover that Vladivostok has a Chinese name, Haishanwei. And it was called Haishanwei for 200 years, starting with the Treaty of Nerchinsk in 1689, where a strong Qing dynasty and a weak Moscow, the Qing took most of eastern Siberia to include Vladivostok.
Real quick, before we go on, I just want to put up on.
Okay, so here's the screen. Vladivostok is over here. Supposedly, this is one of these really great cities in the world right now where people want to invest. Just going back before 2022, before Russia and Ukraine, people were talking about Vladivostok as a huge growth potential, kind of like a Medellin down in Colombia, some of these other places that were diamonds in the rough, and that was one of them. But this used to be a Chinese territory, and this kind of makes sense. Like the what was the last dynasty? The Qing, was it the? Oh boy. What was the last dynasty now? It's slipping my mind. It was the Qing, I think. Qing. but they are from Manchuria. They were actually Manchurians, and Manchuria is this North China section. So this very recent history, Vladivostok has very recent history with China, but Russia owns it now. So let's go back and listen.
On screen, sort of a map of where Vladivostok is, so the audience has an idea. You know, it's a major port that it gives China direct access to the Sea of Japan.
Huge.
So now that I think everyone has a context of what this is, yeah, please carry on.
Yeah, no, the strategic implications of not having access to the Sea of Japan at Vladivostok are impossible to underestimate. Oh, and while we're on that one, look at the border between North Korea and Russia. It excludes.
Okay, this is another interesting one. So the lighter country obviously is Russia, and it touches North Korea, and China is kept away from the Sea of Japan. That's crazy. They don't even have access to the Sea of Japan.
China, there's a 10-kilometer stretch of the what river is that? I'll think of it in a second. But anyway, there's a river that goes, and the PRC could actually dredge it and run ships there. But Russia and China, or actually it was the Soviet Union and North Korea, built a very low bridge across the river there, the Tumangan, I think. But they built this bridge, so there's no chance they could dredge the heck out of it. They couldn't get a boat under it. I mean, these are so obvious signals that most of us miss that I hope to elucidate today. And so in 1860, when you think of the unequal treaties, the beginning of the century of humiliation and all those things, it kicked off with the unequal treaties. This one, the Treaty of Peking, it's called. And there were 3 signatories. What are the 2 we all know about? Well, British and then the French, right? No one talks about the third signatory, which is the Russians. And when they signed that piece of paper, it took Vladivostok back. So as of 1860, Haishan-Wei reverted back to its the name, or it picked up the name.
Okay, 1860 is when this unequal treaty was written. What else happened around 1860? I'm thinking of the American Civil War, which wasn't that long ago. I mean, yeah, it was, what is that, 150, 160 years ago. But it's very raw in people's minds, especially the Century of Humiliation. I mean, that's a centerpiece of Chinese domestic and foreign policy. And that's when they lost it in the unequal treaties from Russia. So, okay.
The name Vladivostok. So that's a big deal. And my Chinese counterparts, when I talked about this, they're like going, we don't want the netizens talking about this, right? Rather than claiming the entire South China Sea based on these spurious Ming shards of China, on the subterranean or submarine floor. I mean, those are really hard claims to substantiate, but their claims to Vladivostok are pretty valid when you think about it. So that right there is an area that both the Chinese and the Russians recognize as a problem. You wonder why Putin hosted Xi Jinping in Vladivostok that time when they were making those caviar roll-ups. I'm pretty sure that was a poke in the eye to his friend Xi Jinping.
Now that's interesting because I know there's been a lot of history between the Soviet Union and Communist China, and it's not always been good. But I always kind of thought there was Putin and Xi might actually kind of like each other. Like, there's the friendship medal Xi gave to Putin. I think Putin gave Xi a bunch of like Russian ice cream he liked
for his birthday when they were at some summit, I think. Yeah.
But this is interesting that you're mentioning, like, oh yeah, they're rolling up these caviar rolls.
I do think it's lost on Putin. And then my favorite meme for this is the Economist cover from 2019 or 20, probably 19, of a small Russian bear sitting on the lap of a giant panda. And that drove a stake in the heart of Putin, which he's probably suffering from right now if the rumors are true. These are all things that point to the frictions and the fraught relationship. It's a marriage of convenience. Interests are only overlapping in a very small way. Here's another example. 2004.
So yeah, that's the big one right there, is that their interests are only overlapping in a very small way. And what is that interest? It is the United States. So that's a pretty weak basis of a long-lasting relationship, especially when you have things like Vladivostok. You have things like Central Asia that we're going to get to here in a second. So there's a lot more to that they have conflicting interests than they have in alignment. And I've said this for a long time, that as land powers in Asia, they just fundamentally have conflicting interests.
14, invasion of Crimea and eastern Ukraine, we sanctioned the Russian economy. So Russia has no access to anything reasonable economically. So they need to sell. There's been negotiations on a pipeline called the Power of Siberia pipeline. that had been stalled because the Chinese kept coming in lowball and the Russians weren't taking it. Well, interestingly, the Power of Siberia contract was signed in 2014 for $600 billion, which was, I think, far below. It's like a 10-year contract of just endless energy, far below what the Russians were asking. But they needed the cash, and their friends, the Chinese, came in and lowballed them. I think that's still stuck in their craw. And I got a long list of these things if you want to run down it. But here's the area we should focus on in the future, because Vladivostok is kind of in the past. We're not talking about Central Asia. We really need to talk about Central Asia.
All right, so that's the first clip. I wasn't aware of the low bridge to keep the Chinese from using that river, and that China didn't touch the Sea of Japan, and that Vladivostok that recently was part of China. So that is a huge, huge flashpoint for future relations, as well as around that same area is where they had the 69 battle. It wasn't a war; it was a single battle between Russia and the CCP. And that was very recent, not 160 years ago, but 50 years ago. So, they are not perennial, they're not natural allies. They're actually natural enemies. But let's go on to the next clip here. Just a little fast forward.
So what the U.S. had done is kind of eventually saw these tensions right in the 70s, and there's this idea that you could separate them a bit.
Well, a major tank war on the Ussuri River in 1969. Everybody
That's
kind
what we're
of
talking about.
glosses over that too. I mean, a major war between two. And guess what? 2 years after that, Henry Kissinger was in Beijing negotiating some sort of a mutual treaty. Do you think the PRC really want to be aligned with the U.S.? Of course not. But you got the enemy right on my doorstep, and then the enemy, as they call us, they still call us that, 8,000 miles away across the Pacific. So we were an easy bet.
It was also a marriage of convenience.
Well, exactly. And I was a believer in that. I was spouting that until I got to the embassy in Beijing and went, "Oh man, I've been wrong all this time." I wish more people would have that reckoning. I guess I got this wrong.
There's a lot of Kissinger type people who probably should be like, "Oh, whoops, that was wrong."
What do you remember, a moment of being like, okay, I need to reevaluate this?
It was about 3 weeks into my stay there in Beijing, and I had asked for a meeting with my counterpart. Again, actually, he wasn't my counterpart. That's another thing. My counterpart was this one star named Li Ji. There we go, Admiral Li Ji. But I get stuck with this guy named Huang Shuiping. I think he's still in the system. Anyway, so he finally comes over for lunch or whatever, and he says, "Hey, I'm Dave. You can call me Dave, or whatever." And I go, "What do I call you?" He goes, "You can call me Lao Huang." And I'm going, I didn't do my homework. I go, "Dude, you're 4 years younger than me. Why am I going to call you Lao Huang?" And as soon as that happened, I see these petty, insignificant games they're playing. Like, my only means of communication with Lao Huang was via fax. He wouldn't give me his phone number. I mean, the complete lack of reciprocity, which is why when I was at State Department, guess what we talked about endlessly? Reciprocity is we're going to make this relationship more balanced. We are not going to accept crap anymore. And we're going to demand things from the PRC that we have not, that we deserve. Anyhow. So
All right. So the reason why I let that section play was, well, first I want to cover two things. The first one is the distant power. And this is one thing that Peter Zion talks about a lot. And I'm not a big, not a big follower of Peter Zion, but I do like some of of his work. And he talks about, in this coming era, the United States is a distant power versus the enemy on your doorstep. And if the U.S. isn't there to kind of be policeman of the world anymore, we pull back and we're more isolationist, then it makes the U.S. an even more attractive partner far away. So that's one thing that he was talking about there. Then also he said about the discrepancy, and they wanted reciprocity in the way that China plays these almost petty games of trying to be above you and put you down. Now, he's an American diplomat, American ambassador, and they're doing this to him. What are they going to do to the Ethiopian diplomat? What are they going to do to the South African diplomat? What are they going to do to any diplomat from Uzbekistan or whatever? They have no way to be equal and to get real good faith negotiations or anything. If China tries to do that to the United States, what are they going to do to everybody else? So they are not a friend. They are not friendly to these people. And I'm sure if This guy is noticing this. The other people that are treated worse are definitely going to notice it. So that was one reason why I let that play. But I think this clip has a little bit more to go. So let's continue.
Basically, I mean, as soon as I got there, I realized this relationship's not what it's made out to be by lots of people who have conflicted interests.
Well, I mean, you made a good point. We're kind of talking about the past, and we need to talk about what's coming next. And Central Asia is a huge part. We did an episode about this on China Uncensored, how China is really undermining Russian efforts in Central Asia and like Kazakhstan, a lot of these kind of places. So, what is your take on that? What do we need to watch out for?
If you look at the Belt and Road, right, we got the Maritime Road, this straight line belt. Well, it goes right through Central Asia. So the Russians have their Eastern Economic Union, I think it's called. Then they've got their CSTO, the Central State Treaty Organization. These are long-term established things. But meantime, here comes this Belt Road with plenty of cash and influence that it seeks to divide these areas from the Russians. It's mostly economic, but I don't for a minute think that Putin appreciates this. And if he's going to go to war over Ukraine, getting too close to NATO, another area of former Russian sphere of influence, and like you guys were talking about, the Central Asia is even even more tense and fraught. So again, this is an area where Putin holds his nose, but I'm pretty sure he's got a plan to resolve this.
And I'll add to that, the Central Asia there is a high percentage of Muslims. And if you're talking about Uyghurs and you're talking about Central Asia and the stands and Muslims, are they going to want the Chinese influence, or are they going to want the Russian influence? So that starts putting them at even more odds from a religious standpoint. There is a very high percentage of Muslims now in Russia. So they're known for being Orthodox, but there is a very high percentage from Central Asia of Muslims in the Russian Federation, or whatever they call it today. So that's another wrinkle.
So I can talk a lot more about that, but here's what I look at. Charlie Wilson's War, one very entertaining movie, but to look at our strategy back then, it was pretty sound. Russians are overextended in Central Asia and Afghanistan in this case, and presents vulnerabilities. They're overextended in Pakistan and Afghanistan right now, and rather than our knee-jerk reaction to come help them, we should allow them and the Pakistanis to enjoy the bed they made, because it's not going well.
That's one thing I've been saying as well, is that if the U.S. stops being policeman of the world and pulls back, which I hope they do, stop shedding blood and treasure overseas for these things, then the chips are going to fall where they may. And people are going to have to get along. And guess what? They're going to realize really quick that they have borders with countries that hate them. You know what I mean? I mean, of course, Pakistan has been living with this with India, but all of these borders over there are going to become fluid. People alive today, especially my generation and younger, they don't understand how fast borders can move and how much borders can move. It was just before, I was born, about 2 decades before I was born, the entire map changed. The entire map can change again. And whether it's this decade or next decade, the entire map can change. I'll tell you what part of the map is not going to change. U.S. borders with Canada and Mexico. But I'll tell you what borders will change. I guarantee you China's borders will change. And Russia's borders will change. And Pakistan's. And probably Iran's. These are the geopolitical things that you got to think about, where you're going to invest your money and all that stuff. But okay, let's continue.
Meanwhile, if we help Pakistan, we put India on the back foot. Go ahead.
Well, so the main thing I'm getting from this is the idea that China and Russia are in some kind of alliance that will be able to trip up the U.S. or launch a successful invasion of Taiwan. It really is not there.
No. Only where it's convenient. You're not going to see Putin stick his neck out for his friend Xi Jinping when he gets bogged down in the Middle East, for instance, with this Iran-Riyadh thing. That's not going to go very well. So, I don't think you're going to see a lot of effort, political resources, whatever, extended by the Russians to bail Xi Jinping out. And look at the economy right now. I mean, we talk about Li Keqiang's death. But he was the lead economist. Of course, he's been sidelined. And so you can see what's happening to the economy. It was completely predictable. And you can see
This is an interesting part. So this Li Keqiang, I think that's how you say it. He recently died, and he was the more capitalist counterweight to Xi's hardcore Marxist Leninism. So this guy's gone. Now there is, uproar, or the scales have all been tipped off in China. But they have a good conversation here about this.
Beijing asking Moscow for some help on this. They ain't going to get it.
How would you characterize what's happening to the Chinese economy right now?
Truth. American business is finally realizing that one, I can be arrested for no good reason, or exit banned for no good reason because I didn't do something that the government wanted. As you know, there's no consequences for lying in that system. In fact, there's consequences for telling the truth, right? You just revealed a state secret. The fact that your bank, your business is insolvent, and that you may have to declare bankruptcy, that's going to get you in trouble. There's no problem with rolling over bad loans or making up data that keeps American investors from buying, into Alibaba, Tencent, whatever you want to call it, Luckin. So all that's happening now is that all those hens have come home to roost, and the facts, you just can't cover the facts up anymore. And you notice how when they're resolving this debt through bankruptcy, it's the renminbi denominated investment that gets treated first, and then the overseas investment next. I mean, everybody knew this. It was just delusional that American businesses and Wall Street didn't act on that.
All right. So, been talking about that, about foreign direct investment into China. That was one of the big things that built up China. It is one of the big things that built up all empires, including the United States, and all the big players in the world. Foreign direct investment. China has just been supercharged because it was really the only source of, high quality growth, quote unquote quality growth, from around the dot-com bubble through the great financial crisis. That was China. And people didn't want to believe that they were really actually communists. But now, like he said, they can stop you. They can stop your exit visa. You can't leave if you're a foreigner. Sometimes if you're under investigation, they will disappear you. They'll disappear their own people. And Apple has just announced that they're going to be manufacturing the iPhone 17 in India now. Foxconn, which is their big supplier over in China, is under investigation, similar to how like Alibaba and Jack Ma and stuff were under investigation recently. So it's not looking good for their actual capitalism with Chinese characteristics. That is long, long gone. Okay, let's go on to the next section, next highlight. 23 minutes.
Now. But this is interesting. It seems like there's so many different conflicting things happening. Like I know some people will point to, the U.S. is investing a lot of money in Ukraine, and now with the Israel-Palestine thing, that's a focus now, and this is really dividing U.S. energies. And some people are saying, well, this is the perfect opportunity for China to come in and take Taiwan. But from everything you're saying, with China's economy going down the toilet, with not anything resembling a real alliance between China and Russia, it just kind of seems like everything is falling apart. And that's good in the fact that like China might not be able to invade Taiwan.
But maybe they also want to invade Taiwan more now because they need the nationalist fervor.
Yeah, well, so that is what how people are analyzing this. That things are becoming more likely that an invasion will happen.
Right. I'm in the camp that they have no interest in invading when you've got a January 24 election, that they are doing a pretty good job on influence ops. I was there in Taiwan in August, and we were talking about.
So Taiwan has an election coming up in January. That's interesting. And, recently they have been, the politics there has been swinging more towards not confrontation with China, like trying to get along, but continuing the two-state system or whatever they have, but not being provocative towards China. So that was the political party that won the majority last time. And that female prime minister, she got kicked out. So now there's this next election. I guess they have it every 2 years. Maybe it's every year. I don't know. But we'll see if they can continue going down that road of being more like a soft takeover politically of Taiwan. But he's saying that he doesn't see the military threat right now.
that. And look, Taiwan is on the leading edge of dealing with Chinese disinformation. China Radio International. I was watching CCTV4 in I think I was in Kaohsiung at the time, and they had this expert. I love how they tread out these experts. Sometimes they're Westerners, useful idiots, and sometimes they're mainland Chinese folks who claim to know a lot of stuff, even though they're locked down on information. But this expert's talking about how the U.S. is selling substandard stuff, the F-16V. The delivery is so slow, and the J-20, their F-22, is far superior to all this stuff. What I found interesting is that Taiwan actually let CCTV put that out there, because CCTV4 is Chinese language programming for external consumption. That is not the message they're sending inside. The message that they're getting inside China is CCTV1. You guys ever seen CCTV1?
Yes, unfortunately.
It is this anodyne recitation of what Xi Jinping had for breakfast and then who he met with next. And if you were to watch CCTV1 in Taiwan or here in the US and not CGTN, you'd go, oh, I get it. I see. Yeah, this is right back to the Soviet Union. The cult of personality, completely disconnected from reality. This is pure propaganda. And so one of my goals would be to get not just Taiwan, but the US to bring CCTV1 into American homes. And so you can look at that. And maybe you guys can do that. Maybe get some clips with Li Keqiang, and we know what the reality is, and here's how the Chinese propaganda machine is putting it out there.
It's actually interesting with Li Keqiang's death. I was looking at Chinese state-run media websites this morning because the news just broke.
Because we're recording this on Friday.
Yeah.
So the news just broke. So it's interesting that Li Keqiang passes away, even in their external English language media, is tucked away into a little corner under giant headlines about Xi Jinping hosting some unimportant regional meeting about something that's in font that's 30 times bigger than the Li Keqiang is dead thing. It was just interesting to kind of have that visual reminder of what the priorities of Chinese propaganda are.
Well, replay Hu Jintao's unfortunate dismissal from the 20th Party Congress. And remember when Xi Jinping kind of looks over at the security and gives him the cut it. As Li Keqiang's walking out, he looks down. I mean, as Hu Jintao's looking out, he looks down at Li Keqiang. And Li Keqiang kind of carefully looks at him, and you can see there was something there, right? We can't allow this sort of thing. Palace Intrigue, you can imagine there were some undercurrents. And you're seeing that too. The reports from the Japanese media on the first.
Well, the Shanghai clique. So there's all sorts of these different cliques over there. And I think Xi Jinping came up from the Shanghai clique, but now he's obviously has to tamp down everybody else. So, but it's just a bunch of warlords still. From this whole discussion here that they're having, I just came away with the idea that, there's very rich interests out there in China, and it's just a bunch of warlords the same way it has been for hundreds of years.
At Beidaihe, right, where the, what was his name? The retired general officer.
Are you thinking of Zheng Qinghong supposedly leading this criticism of Xi?
Yeah. But anyway, it was of that nature. And everybody's dismissing the Japanese reports. But I think there was a lot to that. When he has run the economy into the ground, when he's become this unpopular, when the CCP is no longer, his popularity is flagging, you got to imagine that they're, whatever the Shanghai clique is doing these days is really starting to go, hey, we need to change this. We need to change leaders. 10 years is up and he's still here. He's going to continue to destroy our economy and our position in the world. So all these things point to a problem that in the past, death of Stalin, what we've seen in the Soviet Union has resulted in some kinds of purges. I mean, Mao was purged in 1960 or 1961, right after the Great Leap Forward. Then he came, roaring back in 66. But even Mao was purged. So I can see Xi Jinping getting the boot here.
Well, the Mao coming roaring back, the price of that was a decade of cultural revolution, which was one of the most destructive things in Chinese history. It was just terrifying.
But you have these power centers and these cliques, and it's funny with how they treat their senior leaders. Again, the Russian sense, they die of deceleration sickness, like falling from a building or poisoning. But the PRC is comparatively gentle with the folks who've fallen out of favor. Like Deng Xiaoping was rehabilitated twice, right? He was sent down to the country or 3 times, but he was sent down at least twice, but he came back. So Mao was sent down, but he wasn't necessarily, probably house arrest at worst, kind of held in reserve in case we need him again, and they allowed him to come back. So you can see that happening here coming up with Xi Jinping as well. I think he's done enough. He's made enough of a mess of things that it wouldn't surprise me a bit.
Very, very interesting. So one of the things I've been talking about for years is that, the Soviet Union lasted, 75 years? China is coming up or just past 75 years. So they might be coming towards the end of their lifespan as a communist country. Perhaps their opening up that they did economically is going to give them, another 25 years or something. But he's saying that they're going to retire Xi. But Xi is he's consolidated so much power to himself. If there is a way to knock him down, it might take down the whole CCP. So that's just my thought on it.
If after Li Keqiang's death, have you seen the protests online? Because remember, Li Keqiang was like a grandpa Wen Jiabao. He was revered because he was a counterweight to this heavy-handed communist thing.
Yeah, it's interesting because people don't really know a lot about Li Keqiang. Like in the New York Times obituary, announcing his death, they even said like we could not confirm his survivors. Like it was weird because they were just like he's got a wife and a daughter, but like I couldn't find her name online. But
I just think of him as the GDP guy.
yeah, I think like Li Keqiang is kind of a blank slate for which people to kind of
all of their dreams.
yeah, project their dislike of Xi Jinping onto, right? Like it's kind of like the classic Chinese, you know, praise other people's kids in order to kind of like shame your own kids. So like Xi Jinping is in power, and like now Li Keqiang's dead, and Li Keqiang is like the best ever because we don't like Xi Jinping and what he's doing.
Well, he was a counterweight, and that's why I think he fell out of favor. But it was nice that the Communist Party picked his successor with a similar name, Li Qiang. So that that's very helpful. On that note, and then I think you guys can help me out on this one. If you look at the sacking of Li Shangfu and Qin Gang, Qin Gang was Xi Jinping's hand-picked boy, right? He put him in D.C. and then he brought him back. These things all seem related to me. Have you guys talked about that much?
We have. The take we're kind of doing on that right now is because with Li Shangfu, Qin Gang, and also a lot of the Rocket Force people, like those are different types of purges than we've seen before. These were all Xi's people. He basically built the Rocket Force into what it is today. Xi Jinping did. So kind of the analysis that we're taking on this is Xi Jinping has sort of used corruption and national security to go after purging a lot of his political opponents in the past. And now sort of his enemies are using that kind of language to force Xi's hand to go after his allies, which weakens his position, makes him look unstable at best, particularly in the West, where, it's really reading as Stalin vibes right now. So that's kind of how we've been looking at it, that, this is not necessarily something she wanted to do, but was kind of forced to do.
Right.
I mean, that's crazy. Like I said, it's just a bunch of warlords. There's high back and forth. People can be purged. People can be retired and taken out of retirement. There's all of these power cliques around the country. I mean, I guess that could be the same everywhere, but we have some semblance of a rule of law in a lot of places. Of course, the recent persecution of a former president is testing the boundaries. Can the Constitution maintain being bent this far? And will it break or will it snap back? So that's very interesting. But the Chinese system just, anything goes. Power is all that matters. And looks like Xi could be on the ropes here. Will he fight back? That's a big question. Okay, let's go a little bit forward. We have a few more minutes here. They get into some interesting stuff again about Central Asia. So right here.
Yeah, I think the big thing Western observers need to understand that Xi Jinping is not and has never been in this sort of position of absolute power. He was struggling with the Shanghai clique, the Jiang Zemin faction. We've been calling it for so long. Even after his death, that's ongoing with basically Jiang's right-hand man, Zheng Qinghong, still kind of leading the fray. And just with the economic troubles and popular resentment against Xi Jinping, this is kind of one of the reasons we've been analyzing that China likely won't start a war over Taiwan right now, is that, that would require Xi Jinping putting somebody in charge of, China's Joint Command. And that would mean that person would become the most powerful person in China, and he would be enabling very likely a coup. And so Xi is kind of paralyzed. He can't do too much without undermining his own position. And, from what I've been hearing, like, he is not getting a lot of information from his people. People aren't executing his decisions very well. He's just becoming more and more isolated, even within the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, where the PPLA is concerned, I completely agree. And how many times has he said prepare for war? And you and I asked my cadets, what does that mean? They go, well, I mean, it's like, lock and load, pick up your rucksack and go fight. No, what he means when he says prepare for war is stop dabbling in expensive art, stop selling real estate, stop lining your pockets, stop selling your stuff to Burma. I mean, it is the most corrupt organization. I mean, I can statistically show you it's the most corrupt organization in the Chinese government.
The PLA, you mean?
the PLA. And when he says that, what he's saying is, I don't believe you can do anything that you claim to be able to do. Right? That's clearly the message. And he keeps saying that, which tells you, is he really going to risk it all on Taiwan with an organization that hasn't really been challenged since, and even 1979 wasn't a real challenge. They haven't really been tested since the Civil War. So if I were him, he looks at the U.S. military, and we've been fighting nonstop for 30 years. I wouldn't even think about trying that. Remember, military activity with Taiwan, whether it's a blockade or an invasion or whatever, involves the risk of loss. If I use insurance or investment terms, if he loses, he's done. That's his neck. And so, we can still mess around in the information space, the economic space, legal, and all the rest with very low risk. When you start pulling triggers, the risk goes way up, and I don't think he's willing to accept it.
Great points. The one thing I've been saying is it's a doctrine issue. So, especially in the naval side, that they've never won a naval battle, even though they have supposedly have all these cutting edge, ships for their Navy, and they keep pumping them out, but they've never won a naval engagement ever in the history of China. And they haven't fought a war. He said, the last major conflict was the Civil War, where the CCP came to power. So, there's just no practice. There's no doctrine. The U.S. is, unfortunately, we can say this, but one of the benefits of being an expeditionary military forces, you get a lot of practice, and your doctrine is airtight. You run circles around. You know what to hit, what causes problems with the enemy, because you have experience with that. China doesn't have that. And 1 million people, 1 million man army, or whatever they have, a 3 million man army, that doesn't matter if you don't have the doctrine. I mean, they had 3 million people in the CCP army when they had their revolution, and these guys were fighting, with the, what's it called? The hay thing that you stab the hay and move the hay, and if you don't have experience, you don't have the proper weaponry and outfitting and leadership structure and all of that, it doesn't matter how many men you have. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. Let's go on to the last clip here, guys. Hope you're enjoying this. If you're watching on YouTube and Rumble, give a like, comment down below. I always check all the comments. Okay. The main point of watching this is to break the, hypnosis that China is some big, bad next superpower. We hear all about the BRICS, and we hear about, the death of the dollar, and the renminbi is going to take over the world. And, the next global hegemon is going to be China, when that is totally not the case. If you are trying to predict and benefit from future trends, you should not be betting on China right now. All right, let's go to this one.
Unimaginable. But let's go back to the original topic: Western China and the stance. Remember, Xinjiang's original name, Xinjiang, New Frontier, right? Has not always been Chinese territory. Let's explore the language a bit. The real name is East Turkestan. We were talking about the 5 stands: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkestan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. But there was a 6th, and that's East Turkestan. Annexed back in 1950, 1951. Why don't we talk about that more? And Tibet, the Dalai Lama is, getting ready to depart. He's named his successor. Unfortunately, Chinese law says he can't reincarnate outside of Tibet. Again, the idiocy of that. We should be mocking that. We should be, and then we should support Tibet. I was at an event, a conference, I can't tell you which one, but because of Chatham House, but the Chinese rep, guy named Da Wei, who's out and about right now. Man, he's the guy who's allowed to gently criticize the PRC. So he looks like he's one of us, but he's not. On one of my slides, I put the word Tibet. And I was basically saying India's perspective on Tibet. I wasn't mentioning it, as an American. That guy, he completely dropped the pretense of being a friendly, happy guy, and he just made a complete spectacle of himself in front of the whole group. And then the meeting adjourned, and then very publicly came to me and castigated me in a very loud voice for even saying Tibet on one of my slides. I see they're a little sensitive on this topic. Why don't we
should push?
We should. Central Asia, the border with Xinjiang, East Turkestan, these are all things that we should be talking about. The genocide. And we're not.
I'm curious, talking about Central Asia, how you think Russia and China are going to intersect there, because it's interesting. China's moving in economically with the Belt and Road, but in some of these reports of like, Uyghurs and Kazakhs being taken by China, there's been reports of people being kidnapped from Kazakhstan back into Xinjiang in China. And Kazakhstan is also, historically like a satellite of the
Russia.
Soviet Union, the Russia, and Russia has security personnel in Kazakhstan. And some of these reports and like people were talking about essentially being taken in by Russian security personnel working in Kazakhstan in order to help the CCP like repatriate people to China. So what do you think that is going to happen if like
I have not heard that that they were actually going in and abducting people, kidnapping people, and taking them out of Kazakhstan and probably the other stands back to China. Of course, you have to talk about the Uyghurs and all of that. And like I said earlier about the Muslim population in that area, they're going to resist a Chinese influence there. I've also just recently read a story about, I think it was Uzbekistan, where there was this, I guess, a little road stop just on the other side of the border outside of China. And that's where a lot of these Chinese people came in to talk business with the Uzbekis or whatever you call them. And it was starting to become a problem with the kind of mafioso tactics that China was using. So, as China moves into these areas, they're going to meet resistance.
the CCP continues to kind of move into these zones, not just like economically, but politically?
You remember Operation Foxhunt is not just the U.S., it's global. And most countries resist less than we do on these forced extraditions. Kazakhstan is one of them. No, I would think that the Russians would take great umbrage at that, especially if one of these Kazakhs happens to be their boy, they're in Astana or whatever. So again, but Russia can't say too much because they're in many ways obligated to maintain this facade of friendship and all the rest. But you asked about where we can push the Shanghai Cooperation.
And right now, they're actually have to sell oil to China, so they can't risk pissing them off. But this is just a marriage of convenience or friendship of convenience. It's not an actual long-term partnership. They will go back to war, at least proxy wars in these satellite states. So, all right, that's it for this. Let's bring up the next topic. Actually, I'm just going to skip the Balding's World. I will link it, of course, in Telegram. It was sent out this morning. He's just talking about how the China model, how it is not able to pivot into a more consumption-based model. So you have consumption and you have investment, and those are both in GDP. Well, if you invest, you invest with the hope of a return. But if you're just building ghost cities, that none of this will ever have a return. You're just dumping money in. And so usually you expect that return to service the debt. Well, if you can't get a return from a ghost city to service the debt that was taken out to build a ghost city, what do? You have to take out more debt. And then they just say, you cannot default. Banks, you cannot default on these people. Give them more debt. That's why the debt bubble has built up so fast and so high in China. It puts the U.S. to shame. Like, the U.S. is 130% debt to GDP. China's like 250 official. And if you count like hidden debt and all this stuff, it goes up to 350% debt to GDP. And they don't get any return to service that debt. So this could really crumble pretty quick. Okay, let's go to, I'm going to, sorry, 1 second, guys. I want to bring up a tweet that we talked about this morning, and it did cause some back and forth in the Telegram. Sorry for the delay here. Okay, this is James V. Strat, and he says technology is deflationary. Prices will get cheaper over time. Sometimes that goes against the credit debt-based systems, or sorry, something that goes against a credit debt-based system. The two are converging. Deflation is natural and credit system isn't. This is, and he tags Jeff Booth. This is what separates me from Jeff Booth. I'm in the deflation camp. Jeff Booth is not in the deflation camp, but he calls it deflation. All right. Prices going down due to technology is not deflation. That is just prices going down. Deflation is a reduction in the money supply. So Jeff Booth is not a deflationist where I am. I believe that there is going to be an actual shrinking of credit in the globe or around the globe. So I responded to this and I said, you're forgetting a step. Credit precedes technology. So when you have the VC funding and you or you have early stage investment, or you invest into building a factory, invest into building some infrastructure, like even a government that is building electrical infrastructure or roads, they take out bonds to do that. I mean, that's credit. So first comes credit, then comes technology, and then price declines. So if we go back up here to his original tweet, technology is deflationary. Okay. How does that make sense if credit has to precede technology? At least mass adoption of technology. Like it doesn't matter if Joe Schmo invents something in his garage. If he doesn't have the ability to borrow money to build a business around it and make it and distribute it to the world, you have to have credit that comes before distribution of technology. So that's inflation, technology, and then price declines, not deflation. This is not deflation. It's actually inflationary. So credit from savings will produce tech much slower. So a lot of times in Bitcoin, we talk about circulation credit versus commodity credit. So commodity credit comes from savings. There's no money printing involved. Circulation credit is when you make a loan and it poofs into existence. But remember, circulation credit is offset by a corresponding asset, the loan itself. People don't get this really, that it's not like money printing where you think you're just going to add numbers to the asset side of your balance sheet and that you're going to print money. No, you actually print offsetting assets and liabilities on two different balance sheets. So it's a unique thing. But okay, so credit, circulation credit or commodity credit. If you use commodity credit to fund this technology, it's going to happen a lot slower. Now, what will the other guys do? What will the other foreign countries? What will China do? What will Russia do? What will Europe do? Or even if it's a friendly competition, what will the other people do? They will use circulation credit and build the technology faster and make their, get the new weaponry or corner the market, get the first mover advantage. So there is a competition here between slow commodity credit and fast circulation credit. So in the Bitcoin standard, we're going to definitely have commodity credit. That's lending from savings. That is definitely going to occur. You can't stop it. You can't stop circulation credit either. That will occur. However, what I was pointing out this morning on the Telegram was circulation credit. The demand for circulation credit is not going to be very high over the next few decades because we're at the end of a credit bubble. And what happens at the end of a credit bubble? People pull back. You actually have deflationary forces. Okay. So for the very same reason why people are going to be chased into inelastic Bitcoin for safe haven reasons is the same reason why Bitcoin Standard initially will not have to worry about runaway circulation credit. But give it a few decades. By 50 years, we'll have, maybe a scientific paradigm shift, and we'll get more 0 to 1 inventions. And then, and debt has been worked down. Maybe we're down to 50% debt to GDP. Then we start a whole new bubble. And then we get circulation credit on top of Bitcoin. So we have people have 50 years, or, it's just kind of a wag, until we have to worry about how do we fight the circulation credit on Bitcoin. But there will be credit on Bitcoin. Another type of credit that people don't often talk about is accounts receivable, the delayed payment credit. That is not commodity money because it doesn't come from savings. If I say, hey, pay me in 30 days, pay me in 90 days, that does not come from savings, and it is not created on a bank's balance sheet. So it's not circulation credit either. It doesn't circulate. So that is another form of credit, and that is a huge form, actually. Think about think about $100 million business. How much do they have in accounts receivable? Probably a lot at any one time. And you add those up throughout the entire economy, you're talking billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in delayed payment credit. So that's a third form, and that also will be in a Bitcoin world as well. That actually will probably take a larger chunk because people can trust it a little bit more. They can trust the money. So anyways, that's all I have for today, guys. Thank you for joining me. My name is Ansel Lindner. This is Bitcoin and Markets. Check out bitcoinandmarkets.com. If you're watching on YouTube and Rumble, like, comment, subscribe. Appreciate everybody that helps other people find the show. Shout out to my guys on Telegram, all of my supporters on bitcoinandmarkets.com. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.